Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. This video is the final video in the little series I've been doing called My Role-Playing Game Journey. Now part one took place in 6th grade when I was 12 years old on the playground when I was introduced to the concept of Dungeons & Dragons. And then we've gone through Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and 2nd edition and 3rd edition. And today I want to talk about the role-playing game material that I wrote myself and how I got into it and some of the thinking behind it. It's not going to be a deep dive into these games. It's going to be an overview. Now, this won't be the last video that I do about role-playing games. I have a lot of them I'd like to talk about, and I'm going to probably do more in-depth stuff on some of the role-playing games that I've written. But this will wind up the series of the journey, starting out as a kid, nerdy kid playing games, and ending up as a nerdy adult writing games. So let's get started. In 2010, believe it or not, 13 years ago, I had just gotten out of dungeon mastering role-playing game that had gone for a few years, and I still had a hankering to, keep my hand in the game. As we talked about in the last video, I had kind of gotten tired of Wizards of the Coast and what they were doing. I was getting more into the old school Renaissance and the indie game creators. And so the first thing I decided to do was to start a blog, and that was The Land of Nod. Now, it was originally on Blogger. Later I moved it over to WordPress. And so it started very simply. When I get ideas, and when I have ideas for this campaign world that I was sort of working on, improving as I went, I'll put them in the blog. Simple as that. And then I thought, well, what if on a monthly basis I actually take the blog posts and turn them into a PDF that people can download for free. Nice and simple. So working on that idea, I also thought, well, I want to do this hex crawl stuff, so I will, I'll put up a map of a certain area, and then over, the course of the month on my blog posts, I'll detail, hexes in the map and yada, yada, yada. It was a nice idea, but logistically it didn't work that well. And so that initial concept of just a little free collection from the blog turned into a magazine. This is the first printing I got of my first magazine, which I just called Nod. This was, you create the thing and then you'd put it through Lulu and you'd get the review copy. And I decided there were certain aspects of it that I didn't like. And so ultimately it ended up looking like that, slightly different, title there up there. Up there. And this was the first thing I produced. I did it as a free PDF and as a hard copy. It was a little bit crude in terms of layout, nothing fancy, a lot of public domain art. Hex map for the Wyvern Coast. The maps never came out very well. I built them in Hexographer. They look beautiful in color, they look beautiful in Hexographer. You turn them into a PDF, they never look particularly good, which is why eventually I just started posting the maps on the blog so people could download them and have a good, clean copy they could work off of. And I just did the descriptions within. So this was where this started. Now some of this, the Fighting Men of Nod, some of this was me using the Swords and Wizardry rules, but wanting to add things to them. Because even though I like the very streamlined basic rules, I like lots of options. I always was like that. In Dragon Magazine, as soon as I discovered that you could have additional classes in games and all that. I wanted to, try out everything. I'm a gonzo kind of guy. That's what I like. So a lot of time in Nod was spent doing exactly that. Converting spells from other editions, converting monsters from other editions, converting classes from other editions. And so the OGL statement at the end could get pretty long with a lot of the monsters, and that would eventually become an inspiration to do other things. But you see, here's all the monsters I had to stat out that I wanted to use. Some original and some others converted. So I did the free issue, pretty good downloads. So I said, okay, the next one I'll actually charge for. I think it was like $1.99. First thing I discovered in publishing, the drop off from free to even just paying $1.99 is pretty big. But fortunately, this was a hobby for me. I wasn't trying to get rich. I wasn't trying to make a profit even. So I kept plugging on. If it had been about making a profit, we would have ended with Nod issue 2. Eventually, I don't know. I don't know if this was the last one I actually published. Nod 33, you can see a lot of things changed. The interiors, I think I improved the interiors over time. I was able to get more stock art, but I was also able to commission art and had a good time doing it. Oh, what's that? Oh, there's my little Lulu shipment form, which probably has my information on it. I don't want to dox myself. There's Carnelian Coast. It was fun, going through this over the years. There's one of my little ads I did. It was fun. I was learning how to, lay things out, how to make PDFs, all that stuff. I did everything in Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel and just found ways to get them to do what I wanted to do. I used Microsoft Paint. I used a couple other free programs, but it's a testament to what you could do with pretty simple tools if you just put in the time and if you're, somewhat creative. But I didn't stop with Nod. The first kind of game that I actually produced, it's called Pars Fortuna. All right, what was this? The inspiration for this was sort of like a fever dream. I literally had a fever, and your mind wanders into weird places, and I got to thinking, we love, in old school, we love random tables, random this, random that for our games. What if you had a randomly generated game? Ooh, what is it? And so when I came to, I actually thought, well, you know what, maybe there's an idea in there somewhere. And so I conceived this idea of using some online generators to generate random races, classes, monsters, magic items, spells, and then try to make it work. First thing I realized was the random classes is not going to work. You just can't randomly throw together abilities and have it make sense as something somebody would do. Fighter, magic user, they make sense, but something that, is kind of like a fighter, but he can move silently and he can do low-level spells. I don't know. It just got weird. So I dropped that idea and kind of went as race as class. And I had a lot of fun doing this. I came up with what I think were some very interesting races. Oh, I got a Lulu shipment thing in there too. I got interesting races, I thought. The spells were interesting. Here's some of the art. A guy named John Kaufman did art for me. It was the first art I ever commissioned. It seemed really expensive at the time. It was not. It was very good. What I really loved, though, is that I described these kind of weird species to him, and what he came up with was like not only exactly what I wanted, but kind of better than I wanted. That was a really fun experience to see something that you kind of invented come to life. I came up with a slightly different spell system for the game that I thought was interesting, that had to do with you could cast a certain level spell at certain time intervals, and if you tried to do it more than that, you had to make some like skill rolls to do it, and if they failed, there could be all sorts of bad mishaps coming to you. You know, this kind of the cost of using your own energy for magic. But it was fun. It was interesting working with, like, you know, playing D&D my whole life. Okay, well, no magic missile, no shield, exactly. You know, and coming up with looking at random spell descriptions, and then trying to say, okay, I'll put this at this level, that at that level, and here's how this will work, and here's how that'll work. That was fun. And the magic items, same thing. This is maybe my favorite thing that I ever created. And it's probably mostly forgotten by now, but it was a lot of fun. And it's out there. Go look for it if you want. It was a fun challenge, and I think it worked, honestly. Talk about games I'd like to actually get to play one day. There's one of them. And a lot of ideas for the games I did, they were just me, you know, coming up with blog posts or trying to come up with an article and then exploring it further. It was a phase in my life where I was in that kind of, you know, just go for it. Just give it a shot. Just don't just have an idea, follow through all the way. And that's how I got to do a lot of these things. Mystery Men, this is the first edition, was a role-playing game, superhero role-playing game, that came from an idea that I had that what if you came up with a system to convert first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or maybe any edition, into a superhero game, using the spells as superpowers. And I did it as an article in Nod, and then I followed it up. And if there's anything that was really interesting about this one, was number one, there's only so much public domain art you can get away with superheroes. There are a lot of public domain superheroes, but the art oftentimes doesn't work that well. So what I had to do with this one, I needed some art for some sample superheroes and villains. And I had a guy I wanted to use, who is out there. That's Joel Carroll. Sorry, I had a brain fart there. Joel Carroll. And so he told me how much it would cost, which was fine. It was not like, you know, it wasn't an outrageous number. But at that time, you know, I'm just working out of my salary and sort of the household budget. I wasn't generating enough money in sales from the things I was making for me to plunge ahead. So I used this brand new kind of internet concept to get the money for the art called Kickstarter. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but this might have been the first role-playing game, at least partially funded by a Kickstarter. It was real early in the process, I can tell you that. And it was interesting, too, because it was it was print on demand. And again, I didn't have working capital. So it was very difficult to come up with perks. And they primarily were, you know, a free PDF and getting your name in the setting, which was Shore City. So if you hit a certain level, there's a little map of Shore City based on Cleveland, Ohio, which is where Superman was born, sort of. Oh, there's Swift Arrow. That was a cool one. So anyway, so yeah, you get your name like as the mayor or a police chief or whatever, or one of the shop owners. And I barely squeaked by. I think I was looking for $300, the princely sum of $300, but I got it, and I made the game, and it was fun. And I got to tell you, this is also one of the absolute best campaigns of anything I've ever run. Was the test campaign for Mystery Men. It was online. I think we had about 6 to 8 players. I set it up so that they started off, individuals in different cities, and then coming together as they encountered bad guys to unweave this big plot that had to do with. It was set like in the '60s. It was old Nazis trying to bring Hitler back to life. They had Hitler's brain. They were going to put it in a Frankenstein monster body, and they were going to transfer, some of the evil Nazi supervillains, their powers to make like Super Hitler. But in the end, Captain Nazi betrays them all and steals all the powers, and the good guys had to defeat him, and they did, and it was a lot of fun, and everybody had fun playing it too. Definitely one of the best games I ever ran in my life. Tales of the Space Princess, a sci-fi game, a little experimental. This one came from a message board. Somebody asked about why haven't science fiction role-playing games ever been as popular as fantasy? And my answer was, because D&D is not a game based on fantasy literature. It's a game that uses the trappings of fantasy literature and steals from a bunch of different places. But the game is group of people go into a dungeon, look for treasure, fight things, try to get out. Whereas a lot of sci-fi games are based upon a science fiction novel or concept, and they don't have the structure of just a game, like a board game or a war game, at their heart, and that's why they're probably not as popular, because obviously like D&D's kind of gonzo, man. It takes in stuff from Tolkien, and it takes in stuff from all sorts of novels and movies and whatever. Like, it didn't care, it was fun. It became a little more grounded over time. And so I thought, oh, what if I made a game that took the concept of Star Wars, where they go into the Death Star and rescue the princess. What if I used that as the whole basis for the game? That's what the game is about. Team of adventurers go into the space fortress to rescue the space princess and get out. And so it used a lot of tropes from sci-fi. Jason Schultes art, which I was able to just commission at this point, and a lot of public domain art that I found. But it sticks very much to doing exactly that. Roll up the characters, and like Star Wars, you can be a Luke or a Han or an Obi-Wan, different levels of experience that are balanced by luck points that let you just, the young ones are lucky and the old ones have to use their skill. So it's designed. Sneak in, explore the dungeon, the space fortress, for the space princess, or for whatever MacGuffin you want. Sneak back out, and then get on a spaceship and escape the enemy fighters. That was it. That's the entire game. It's very beer and pretzels. It's very simple. It's one I'd love to revisit at some point. It was fun coming up with all the different monsters Some of the choices I made in it, I'm not in love with for how things ran, but another fun one to put together. So those were my early forays into doing these books. I was still doing Nod all through this. And I mentioned before that a lot of what I did in Nod was converting things. And converting, and converting, and converting. And it was getting to be kind of a pain in the butt. And I thought, what if I just made a document where I converted all of this stuff that I want to use from different editions into Swords and Wizardry, and just put them in a free book, but one that I could then use as sort of my reference. And as I started that process, it became very obvious that once I'd done all of that work, making it its own game would actually not take that much more work. And so that became the biggest project that I'd ever undertaken, and that was Blood and Treasure. This is the original complete edition. You could also get it like a player and monster manual. This was a lot of work. It took it to another level. A lot of stock art and a lot of commissions went into it, and a lot of work. And I think if I came up with anything in here that was kind of cool, it was the idea of I marked where things sort of came from in the book, whether it was, I think I used maybe the terms basic, advanced, and expanded. So basic was stuff that was in your Moldvay, Cook sort of D&D. And advanced was things brought in from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And expanded was stuff brought in from like 3rd edition. And that way people, running the games, if they didn't want to include some of that, they would have these little letter codes next to things so they could say, oh, that's from the expanded. I don't need to use that. But my assumption was, give everybody everything and let them design the campaign they want to design. It was sort of like, there's so much work being done into cloning different things. This was like, dude, here's the bouillabaisse that I used to play with. A little bit of everything. Just use what's fun. So that was Blood and Treasure. Boy, that was a lot of work. It was fun to do. And then I came up with a simpler version called Bloody Basic. And I did several editions of this game. They all use the same rules, but they swap out different classes, spells, etc. This was the classic edition, so this is your old school D&D stuff. Very simple. I did one that had like 3rd edition type stuff in it. I don't remember what I called that. I did a Mother Goose edition, which is more fairy tale oriented. This was a tremendous amount of fun. You could play a little pig, like that was one of the races. A lot of public domain art in this one because it made sense. The Weird Fantasy edition was like Clark Ashton Smith, a little bit of Lovecraft, Dunsany. This one was a lot of fun too. Weird spell names, everything a little bit slightly off. That was fun. And then eventually I did a 2nd edition of Blood and Treasure. I still get questions about it, and I always have to look it up because I haven't played it so long. David Brohock Williams art for the cover, because I wanted to do something different with the covers. That was the Monsters book. Monsters 2, with a cover by Russ. Esoterica Exhumed. This was all sorts of extras that had shown up over the years in Nod. Obviously a reference to Unearthed Arcana. So tons of classes and spells and everything. I'm proud of these books. I am proud of these books. A lot of work, but it was worth it. And maybe one that took the most work. Grit and Vigor. I mean, I figured I'd already used the normal SRD to do some stuff. Why not use the modern? Modern SRD sucked. And finding a way to make this work to my satisfaction was difficult. But in the end, I'm really happy. I built a database of vehicles and like firearms that is enormous, and came up with sort of a formula to figure out, for vehicles like armor class and hit dice and things, and for the firearms for the damage and rate of fire. Had to come up with ways to handle rate of fire, like, bursts from machine guns. And because when you're dealing with this stuff, the power level spread is huge. If you're looking at an F-16 versus a street thug, but you got to have a system where everything works in concert and makes sense. It's a lot of work. And it took a lot longer to produce. And there were times where many times just put it up. I'm not dealing with this. I come back to it a few months later and get a little bit more work done and throw away stuff I did before. So after I'd done a lot of these big projects, I started focusing in on smaller ones. I wanted to do a system that was not based on the SRD, so it was wholly owned by me. And I got the idea for a game that you could kind of, almost put in your pocket. The games probably came out a little bit too big to put in your pocket. But if you had this game and you had a couple dice, you could play. Came to me when I was flying back home sadly for a funeral. And on the airplane, I got this idea, and I started rolling with it, and it became Man-Bot Warriors. I happen to have some good stock art that I wanted to use, and so this was based on sort of a fictional, like, Transformers cartoon. Very, very simple mechanics. You could learn it very quickly. You could play it with a couple of normal dice. Wrote it in a hotel room. Put it together when I got home. And so I rolled with this concept. I did Deviant Decade, Big City Survival in the 1970s. It was a lot of fun. A lot of 70s movie tropes, the Warriors, Hammer Horror. Swords and Sandals, which is your sort of Greco-Roman ancient role-playing. Barbarians and Basilisks, more the D&D type trope. This one got a little bit thick. Black Death, maybe a little bit of a salute to like the Warhammer idea, but it was set during the 30 Years' War, and how brutal all that was. And so that's 2015. And then I stuck with that size when I did second edition of Mystery Men. Put a lot of work into that silly back cover where I was advertising my own wares. Got some more art commission for this. Oh, we get like a Shore City. I did this one in color because it's such a bummer to work with like superheroes and not have color. And by this time I'd created a lot of villains in Nod that I could play with. Used a little bit of Black Cat. I like that size, although laying it out was kind of a pain in the ass. And so I think the last major game that I've worked on, which has probably outsold all the others, well, this is an early pen and paper football. You can see this is an early review copy because some of it's cut off because I didn't size it right. also in color for all the football helmets I design. So this one came out of a game that I invented when I was probably 11 or 12 years old, on long trips back to the Midwest in a car. And I had a dice and I had a notebook. I made up some football teams. And I would make a schedule and have them play each other where it was just rolling the dice for what each team scored for each quarter. So if you rolled a 1, it was 0. If you rolled a 2, it was 3, like a field goal. A 4 would be like a single touchdown, etc. And so I took that concept, expanded a little bit, and then also used some of the sort of, using D&D combat as an inspiration, came up with a way to simulate offense versus defense in a football game. And this sold extremely well over the years. I also keep the price extremely low. And I've done a pen and paper baseball that does the same thing. That was a lot of fun. Baseball's far more complex than football. But if there's a statistic you're wondering about, how often does the ball go into right field versus left field? It's there. That has got to be the most statified game in human history. It's amazing what you can find. And I used a lot of it. And so there we go. That's my own publishing history. 35 maybe issues of Nod. A whole lot of role-playing games. A whole lot of fun. I learned how to lay things out. I learned how to commission art. I learned how to edit. And then eventually, I kind of ran out of steam. So the last few years, I have not really published anything. I actually have a Deities and Demigods sort of book. Yeah, this is 2017. That is done. That is edited. Art has all been commissioned. And I haven't done anything with it because I just haven't wanted to go through. Let me tell you, son, putting these things in through Lulu or drive-through, it feels like more work than the actual writing of this stuff. I'm serious, man. And I haven't felt like doing it. But someday. So that's the end of my RPG journey. From player to dungeon master to game designer. I didn't set the world on fire with any of these books, but I had a lot of fun making them, and I know there's folks out there who enjoyed them, and I am eternally grateful to you who have. And if you have questions, email me. My email address is out there. Go to the Land of Nod blog. You can find it there. And lots of resources, because I was blogging the whole time, too. I actually just did a blog post a couple days ago for the first time in months. But, oh, dude, there's got to be thousands of entries. If you want free role-playing game material, go to Land of Nod. Blog. I don't even know what the address is anymore. If you look up, Stater, Land of Nod, you'll find it. There's tons of free material. And if any of these interest you, hey, give them a try. I try to keep the prices as low as I can. Again, it's not a money-making venture. Although, it actually probably, over the course of a decade, is profitable. Barely. So that's it. That's the video. If you enjoyed it, please like, please subscribe, and please share with others. There will be more videos where I'll take more in-depth looks at some of these games that I've made. And I have lots of old games that I want to talk about. So if you like the game material, there's more of it to come on this channel. I also review TV shows, movies, usually old TV shows, old movies, because I'm very much into kind of finding all the hidden gems out there, that people maybe have not yet discovered. But hey, man, maybe your favorite movie is one that was made 50 years ago and you just didn't know it. I do book reviews, toy reviews, more to come. So, tune back in later for more. In the meantime, God bless you. I hope you are kind to one another and try to get out there and have some fun. I'll see you later in Dad's Den.